You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. Assessments. They seem to go hand in hand with private club membership. Many clubs have voted to assess members for new amenities in recent years, and many more are considering doing the same in the months ahead. Like death and taxes, clubs see assessments as a necessary evil, but are they? In this episode, we talk to Jim Butler, CEO of Club Benchmarking, who shares his perspective on assessments and how clubs can plan for the future more thoughtfully. Well, thanks for listening in today. There are two things that freak out people who are looking to join a private club, especially if they are first-time club members or looking at clubs for the first time. The two things are initiation fees and assessments, and both are levers that clubs pull to keep their clubs financially viable and moving forward in many cases. But it is a vicious circle. And it's become the expectation for how clubs operate in many cases. The club's amenities get old, as you know, and they need to be updated or expanded in order to keep the members happy and also to be able to attract new members. And then an assessment comes up, and it's voted on, and if it passes, great. If not, well, your club might be stuck or at least scrambling for alternatives to make sure that some of the essential things are taken care of. You could also potentially increase initiation fees and dues, but then what happens in a down economy and updates have to be made? If the membership isn't healthy and engaged, clubs run the risk of losing members, and then they might also be unable to attract new members. And that's not even a mention some of the other quote-unquote casualties of this whole thing, which is distrust in the marketplace, and that can have an impact on prospective members. The situation is if a club's initiation fees bounce all over the place, a prospective member could decide to sit on the sideline and wait for that best deal to come along, or even worse, they could say, you know what, I don't want to play that game. This seems kind of crappy and I don't trust it. So, you know what, I'm going to go build a home or go buy a place on a lake and spend my time there, right, with the kids and approach their discretionary income that way. And yet it doesn't have to be that way. And oddly enough, I do spend some time thinking about these things, and I decided to reach out to Jim Butler, the CEO of Club Benchmarking. He and I had met several years ago at a conference, and I've wanted to have him as a guest for years, but our schedules didn't always align. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today. And in prepping for our discussion, just a little public service announcement for you. But while I was getting ready, I went to the Club Benchmarking website, just doing a little digging around and stuff. And I came across this white paper that's called Measuring Capital Health. And I downloaded it, put my email and my name and all this stuff in there. And I got this document, and it's a terrific piece that introduced me to a completely different way of looking at managing and monitoring your club's financial health. This is not my industry. I'm a marketer, as you may know, but we do so much work in the club space. I'm like, gosh, it'd be better to understand this a little bit better. So read it if you haven't. It's really worth a short read and can be very insightful and connected to what Jim and I are talking about today. So anyway, Jim and I recently spoke about the white paper. We talked about the industry, of course, and managing the financial health of clubs. So Jim, thanks so much for joining me today. It's this is such an interesting topic for me as someone who's trying to learn more about how, the whole kind of the financial planning world works for private clubs. And Lord knows for so many people in the club industry and for members, it can be very confusing when it comes to capital improvements and assessments. And so often when, clubs start talking about making improvements, and then it's always like, well, what is there going to be an assessment and how much is it going to be? And I guess maybe the first place that I'd love to start is, what do most members and in many club leaders not really understand about assessments and how operating and capital income can impact the need for and even the amount of the assessments?
Yeah. I think historically, and it's great to be with you too, and thanks for all you do in the industry such as this and having a platform to talk about some of these things. But the club industry is a very unique industry. And there's two main points that I would make to kick us off today. One is that we are in a not-for-profit business model. And many of the board members that come into the clubs are very familiar with for-profit models and are trying to drive profit. And they drive that profit both to reinvest in either their facilities or their assets and to pay back stakeholders. But at the end of the day, they're judged on efficiency, how profitable they're going to be, what kind of growth rates they're going to have, how many new customers that they acquire. And they come into the club industry and we don't do any of that. So we're a not-for-profit industry. The majority of clubs break even in operations. So we lead with the thought that, number one, this is a not-for-profit industry. So the operating ledger is not a financial driver at the club. And we usually have to duck after that because the board members, that goes right over the top of their head because they come from a world of for-profit. And I'm from Michigan originally. And if you talk to a manufacturing person out of Ford, the first thing they're going to do is start talking about efficiency and how we're going to have efficiency in the club business. It has very little to do with it. As a matter of fact, by definition, the operating ledger doesn't drive the business. So therefore, everybody in the club industry that's not for profit has no competitive advantage on the operating ledger because they don't make money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. So and that's really important for a board member because we have to put the focus on membership satisfaction, not on profitability.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, clubs are very capital intense. So the average club has a gross asset number on their balance sheet of about $28 million. So I always joke with people, okay, who would want to have to put up $28 million to make no money? And everybody usually laughs because we would say, well, that's a pretty dumb business model, but that in terms of the club, that's what we have to have. And the amount of investment in clubs, especially in the last 10 years as the demographics have changed, as you know, during the downturn in 2008 or 9, that's when clubs really had to start focusing on the families and reinvest in the facilities and change their facilities. And in order to do that, we're in the capital business. The clubs that are the strongest are the ones that have the best capital engine. The difference in clubs is not on the operating ledger, it's on the balance sheet. Which clubs can create the most amount of capital? You're in Detroit right now, Oakland Hills, the clubhouse burned down. What do they have to do? They have to create capital in order to replace that asset. They're not finding that on the operating ledger. They got to create capital, and every club is faced with that in terms of, if I want to be a general manager or a board member, I want to be on a club that has the strongest capital engine because the operating ledger, by definition, in our business is break even.
So that's that makes so much sense. And yet the question is how do clubs generate more capital income, and how do they, like, what are their, are there certain go-to ways? I mean, obviously, you can increase that part of a member dues, but what are the other ways that you see that clubs are able to do this?
Yeah. So number one, operating dues does not influence the capital side because clubs are break even, and the operating dues. Clubs consume the operating dues and fund the amenity, but it's at break even at the end of the day. So the things that fund the capital side are the capital dues, and capital dues are relatively new to our industry, and we'll talk about why that is here in a second. Initiation fee income, and we've seen the initiation fees in clubs increase, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen, in a lot of cases, we've seen them double. as we go forward. And then assessments, which generally members aren't crazy about assessments, but those are the three main buckets. And relatively speaking, the clubs fund their capital fairly equally between those three buckets. It's about a third, a third, a third in terms of between the capital dues, initiation fees, and assessments in the industry.
And so, that makes sense and seems typical. And there are some outliers I'd love to learn more about from you as well. But um, focusing on those three items, and this is kind of helping new members understand how this works as well. So they see an initiation fee. All of that initiation fee usually will go to capital. Is that correct? Is that kind of the typical?
That's what we'd like to see. There are some clubs that have operating deficits, and the only place that they can really get that money is on the capital side, and that's a very slippery slope to go in, because again, if you got a $28 million asset that is typically, and clubs are underfunded generally on capital, that's why we have assessments. We have assessments because clubs don't have enough capital in generation of that. So if you're taking that to fund operations, that's not a good thing to be doing. Now, thankfully, the majority of the industry is relatively.
Oh no, he'll be back, God willing. We have lost Jim Butler.
There we go. I'm back. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I don't either. You're doing great though.
Yeah. So,
But,
yeah.
Oh, your camera's gone though.
My camera.
It doesn't. It's audio only, but yeah, I can't see you now. It's okay, Jim.
Here, let me get it. I don't know if I had a power because of the hurricane. We've had a power surges, but I don't think it went off. That was weird.
There you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we were talking about the clubs that are underperforming in their operating ledger that will need to use that initiation fee for operations as well as
right. So we don't like this. We don't like to see that, and the majority of clubs have gotten away from that. But there is a small contingent of clubs that have that. But the industry as a whole is underfunded on the capital because, and I would say for the most part, because we had not understand the importance of capital until the last decade. And management and boards are obviously, we're all learning every single day, but we've learned how significant the need for capital is in the industry. And I'm going to go back to that 2009. Clubs used to have refundable. You're old enough to remember when we had refundability in membership.
absolutely, yeah.
And when we talk about the Michigan market and you talk about some of the big developers coming out of Michigan, they build the clubs, and in order to sell the memberships, they had refundable memberships. Well, when the market crashed in 2008 and then 9, that really went away, and initiation fees decreased, and clubs started collecting capital dues to help supplement that. But we believe that unless you want to do it on purpose, and we do have clubs in our database that do assess and want to assess, those are usually the really high-end clubs. But we're on a mission to try for those clubs that want to get rid of the assessments to get rid of the assessments and create a stronger capital engine between the capital dues and the initiation fees.
Is that, is maybe a simple way of this is probably oversimplifying, but in reading your white paper, it almost seemed like the idea is your capital fund is your savings account.
I wouldn't say savings account, but
investment account.
It's your investment account, because when we look at the balance sheet of a typical club, the balance sheet of a typical club is really simple. there's only two lines that are significant. One is cash and one is net property, plant, and equipment. And if I said to you, Ed, you're on your, committee at your club there, do you know that if you're the typical club, 75% of your assets on the balance sheet are in net property, plant, and equipment? So when we have money in the club business, we don't pay it back in profit. We don't pay it back to stakeholders. What do we do with it? We put it back into facilities. So any money that you have or you make is having enough money to go back and put into your facilities. And when you look at a balance sheet of the club, and you don't have to be a financial guru to understand it, assets are equal to liability and equity. And on the asset side, 75% are in net property, plant, and equipment. And that's very symmetrical to the right side, which liabilities and equity have to match up to the asset. And in the club business, the member equity line, which is typically about 70%, is very simply matches up to net property, plant, and equipment, which is about 75%. What does that mean in English?
Yeah.
That means that the money that you get from the members is going to go into net property, plant, and equipment. And the only reason we have assessments are because we don't have enough member equity.
Got it. And just for the listener, the net property, plant, and equipment is basically like the structures on the club. Is that accurate?
It's the structure and all equipment within the club, the golf courses, the kitchen equipment, the fitness equipment. Clubs are very capital intense.
Right.
As a matter of fact, we've discovered at Club Benchmarking, the only industry that's more intense than the club business is the power industry. Clubs are almost 3 times as capital intense as the oil and gas market. And it's very simply, you got to put in $28 million to do about 10 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So that ratio between 28 and 10 is about 2.8 or 280%.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. So can we just go back to something you said earlier, which is the capital dues being new to the industry? Why is that? When I hear you say that, in the last 10 years, I think, how is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible because the changing of the market in the club business. When the two things that I say that has happened, and we've seen downturns in the industry, and we've seen with COVID the upturn in the industry. But and I'm just going to go back to 2009, when there was a downturn in the industry, many clubs had to cut their initiation fees to get more members.
Mm-hmm.
But they were also faced with they had to change some of their facilities. We had to get into fitness and wellness. We had to get into casual dining. We had to build the golf courses. We had more sets of tees on the golf course, and all of that required more capital income.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have more capital income in a world that was downsizing, clubs had to come up with another avenue of capital, and they had the advent of capital dues at that point in time to generate more capital. We see it all the time where clubs will assess, and they'll assess through some form of annual payment that the members make in time, and it's very rare that we see that go away.
Mm-hmm.
So you maybe have a 10-year assessment program that you pay $1,500 a year. At the end of that 10 years, I'm here to tell you, it's not going anywhere, because the club needs that capital money.
I mean, based upon what you're saying and what I'm learning is that that's not a bad thing. I mean, if you can, as a club, it's almost like if you can if you can invest more money into the future of your club, that will create a healthier club in the future that maybe will avoid assessments in a perfect world.
Yeah, they absolutely. And this is a very, I'm going to tell a cute story just so everybody can remember this. So there's a Ray Cronin, who's my partner and the founder of Club Benchmarking. was the president of Thorny Lea Golf Club up in Boston. And they had a 50-year-old irrigation system, and irrigation systems typically last 20 to 25 years. And Ray wanted to put in capital dues as president of the club, and half the members loved Ray and half the members weren't so high on Ray for trying to put capital dues in. So they had a town hall meeting, and one of the members who had been a member at the club for a long time stood up and said, "Hey, I'm 83 years old. I don't want to, I'm only going to play golf a couple more years, and I don't want to pay for the new irrigation system because I don't think that's fair, Ed." And the reaction is, okay, well, how long have you been a member at the club? Well, I've been a member of the club for 45 years. Well, during that 45 years, how much have you paid in capital dues? Well, I haven't paid anything in capital dues because we don't have capital dues. Okay. 45 years ago, how much did you pay for initiation fees? Well, they were running a great deal 45 years ago, so all I had to do was pay dues. And so the point of that is, to this person, Mr. Smith, we don't want you to pay for the new irrigation system that you are not going to use. We want you to pay for the old irrigation system, which you didn't contribute a penny to and used it for 45 years. And that's the core part of that. And there's a consumption of capital in the club business. And from an accounting standpoint, we call that depreciation. So when we talk about the club industry as a break even, it's break even without depreciation. So clubs need to pay for depreciation plus inflation plus any new facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Up until about 10 years ago, the vast majority of clubs were not covering the cost of capital consumption, like the example that I gave you, and they were pushing that onto the new members and only using initiation fees because there wasn't a capital consumption cost like capital dues. And that's where the capital dues came from. And we're still working through that as an industry. Club benchmarking feels like the best practice is that capital dues ought to cover the cost of that capital consumption, depreciation with inflation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We're advocates of having, an up-to-date capital reserve study or asset management, which is more useful life and even more accurate to be able to cover that with capital dues. And we think the initiation fees ought to be used for what we call aspirational capital. Pickleball. Nobody had ever heard of pickleball before. And we're padel, this casual outdoor dining, the golf technology, the teaching facilities, all of the new stuff that has come in. We don't believe that using that initiation fees predominantly to cover the cost of capital is actually fair or the right business models for clubs to use.
So is it going back to the what you were saying earlier about that a lot of board members who come from the for-profit world try to apply the for-profit thinking into a nonprofit, and so at that time it's like, well, we have initiation, we have dues, that should cover everything, but in fact it doesn't, and it and probably became more obvious after 2009. And is that part of the whole? Am I piecing this
Correct.
together in a somewhat?
Yeah, correct. If I go into a board, and I love doing this, and we're in front of a lot of boards at Club Benchmarking, and if I say to them, tell me in 3 sentences what your business model at the club is, very rare do I hear a good explanation of what we're in. And the business that we're in a not-for-profit, most capital intense industry that is driven, and the most important financial metric in the industry is net worth and the compound annual growth rate of net worth in a business that doesn't drive a financial outcome through the income statement. most board members would have to think about what I just said to even understand what that means. And yet, if I ask them in their own business if their net worth is going up or down, they can immediately tell me what the answer is.
Absolutely. Yeah,
But
yeah.
at the club, they generally can't. We think the most important metric is that net worth, because that net worth represents the amount of money you have in excess of depreciation and is the money that you have to grow the club and invest back into the facilities. And there's three, and we put them in three buckets. There's clubs that have decreasing net worth, and we can predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen in those clubs. And there's going to be a major capital call because they're not keeping up with their facility. There's clubs that are flat. We call them yellow bucket clubs. They're not growing as much as inflation is growing. And again, we can predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen in those clubs. There's going to be a capital call. And then you get about 25% of the industry that is growing at a rate higher than inflation. And in those clubs, we argue about how to spend the capital money versus the yellow bucket clubs and the red bucket clubs where we argue about how are we going to raise the money.
Right. Got it. So, understanding that this is not a net worth question, how does a club like the Union League of Philadelphia, and I think Jeff McFadden actually shared with that Ray Cronin story with me in an episode I did with him. How does that go from like a $7 million club to over $100 million?
Yeah, the funding on that club is based on he's taken in more members and he is playing chess where many people are playing checkers. And Jeff understands the business model of clubs better than anybody in the membership value that is equated with that. And that is he creates more opportunities for them that they're willing to pay for. He's funding that through initiation fees, debt, additional members. He took a business, a city club that is having a hard time opening the doors and needed members. And the way that he drove that membership increase was through additional facilities and capital funding. And it's snowballs. The clubs that are the most successful have the strongest capital engines. In Jeff's case, it's the combination between the initiation fees, the capital dues, and more members. And he takes that money, and what does he do? He creates more experiences through acquiring other businesses. It's really brilliant. We think it's a great way to grow the business. And he is obviously he's an outlier in the industry and something that many people aspire to be like.
Yeah. What are the things that, to that point, and I was fascinated, and when I was listening to him explain some of this stuff, and I mean, it was just I've never seen anyone like that and heard anything like that. Yeah, people will go to Union League to go meet with Jeff and see what he's done. What are the takeaways? I mean, and you've kind of just said it, but what are the takeaways that you say to the club that maybe doesn't have the same opportunities? I mean, or might seem like they don't have the same opportunities to do what was done at the Union League. What are the learnings that you take and that you can share with other clubs that are maybe the yellow area, that are trying to figure it out?
Yeah. I think number one, you have to understand the business model and what business you're in. And I say that sincerely. We go around the country, look at clubs' financials, visit the clubs, talk to people, and really help them understand the business model that they're in. And we believe strategic planning is finding the issues in clubs and then developing strategies to overcome them. And that's exactly what Jeff did. Is they were looking for more members, they were looking for more capital. So he very simply figured out that in that case, it was creating more opportunities and adding more members. And then when you do that and you satisfy them and create value, you can increase initiation fees and increase operating dues. And that was the model he did. I'll give you a couple other examples of that. There's a club in Naples called Gray Oaks. and Gray Oaks had an aging membership there, and in the Naples market, and there's plenty of clubs. There's 150 clubs down there. So in order to increase the turn in the real estate market, they partnered with Moorings Park, which is an A-rated independent assisted living facility. It allowed the older members to move out right next door to Gray Oak, keep their membership, created $1 million worth of additional dues to the club forever, and solve that issue. And that was a fantastic example of that. Mediterra in Naples, what did they do? They went on the beach. They're located kind of inshore, about 10, 12 miles. A lot of their members wanted a beach club. What did they do? They went out and bought a beach club for that and satisfied that part of that. So you got to be brave. You got to be innovative. You got to create opportunities, and you got to lead the board to do that. It's we have yet to come across somebody that we've worked with that you can't innovate and get out of the issue. But what you have to do is you have to create membership value, right, Ed? I mean, that's the business you're in.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, then the market will pass you by. And the market changes every day. We've seen it generationally, but you've got it, and this is what leadership is about, seeing value where other people don't see it and then taking steps to overcoming those bottlenecks.
Yeah. Interesting. I just have one other question for you around this, because I think it's everything that and there's so much more to talk about, just in the interest of, and I'd love to pick this up and with other dimensions, because there's so much to it. But so much of this seems to start with the board of directors, the board of governors, and whatever in the class, the club leaders. What is the barrier for club leadership to embrace the things that you're doing with club benchmarking and some of the thinking that you believe?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to education. The club industry is a boutique industry where you have fundamentally 3,800 small businesses that run their own businesses. And the private club is just that, they're private. If we go to Orchard Lake is not really interested in taking the financials and putting them up in the Detroit News every day so everybody can see that. So
Right.
we have this insular look from a board of directors, where they only have the viewpoint within their own club. And whereas if we're working at Ford or GM, we can go to Yahoo Finance and go see what the competitors are doing. And that's what obviously club benchmarking brings, is that we do financial benchmarking on the industry to help educate the board. And then we have this issue in the club business where we have a board of directors, 9 to 11 people typically. We change 3 to 4 of them every year. And fundamentally, at the end of 3 years, we have a brand new board, and we have to start on over and educate them on what we're doing. And so we find a lot of times that the clubs don't spend enough time educating the business model within the boards. It's not an intelligence issue, because the boards are very smart. They're CEOs, CFOs, COOs, marketing people. They're very successful people, right? That's why they belong to a club. And once you can explain, I can't tell you how many times we walk out of a board retreat where we have very sophisticated financial people say, you know what? Nobody ever explained that to me. I did not understand that. I did not understand how capital intense clubs were, or how important membership value and satisfaction was, and the difference between the operating ledger and the capital ledger. And why would you? If nobody's ever explained it to you, why would you? And that's, the experience of that, and being able to look at it in aggregate. And then it's about choices, right? And in your business, the clubs that are really successful are the ones that have made the right choices So if we can frame what the questions are, then the board can make the determination on what they want to know. And it's counterintuitive. I mean, I'll give you a couple examples that are poster child at club benchmarking. The clubs that subsidize food and beverage the most, or if I put it another way, the clubs that lose the most amount of money in food and beverage are the strongest clubs financially in the industry.
Hmm.
Put that against somebody that's running a for-profit restaurant and see what they think about that, right? It's just totally counterintuitive to them.
Is it because the member experience and that they're investing in that?
It's the member experience, and it's a zero-sum game that although food and beverage is subsidized, at the end of the day, the operating ledgers break even.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, golf course and the golf course maintenance and the golf shop operations in a typical club loses 2 to 3 times the money that the food and beverage do. And yet we've never taken a call in our office. Why do we lose so much money on the golf course? Because most people don't view it that way in terms of what the business model is. The reason we have club dues is we use that to subsidize every operation on the club business. There isn't anything that makes money in terms of divisions within the club business. That's why we have dues. And the most subsidized is golf maintenance. And oh, by the way, guess what the highest membership satisfaction is?
Mm-hmm.
Maintenance.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So interesting. The education component that you mentioned, it just seems so paramount to the whole thing, because I mean, going back to the very beginning of our conversation of for-profit people in this nonprofit environment in changing times, no less, to really understand that, yes, you're really smart and great at what you do, but this is a little bit different. And once you understand, it almost makes me think that not just the leaders, and granted, not every member wants to know this, but if members better understood the model, they might not complain as much about certain things, or they may, if in fact the club is operating with the right intent and the right way.
We think that is a critical component, and every new member, as part of their orientation, should understand what their responsibilities are and how it works. The typical club dues is somewhere around $1,000 a month. Just use that as an example. And the typical club member spends generally an equal amount to that. So somewhere around $10,000 to $20,000. Well, at the end of the year, that $20,000 is completely used up, and we do it again the next year. The club doesn't make any money on that.
Right.
You start over from ground zero. So the money that the club gets to keep to invest in the facilities is that initiation fee and that capital dues, and is continuous. And much like operating dues go up in time, capital dues are going to have to go up in time, and we have to continuously invest that. Now, if I go to the typical club member at a club and ask them to explain that to me, most of them, to your point, have no idea. And we believe that that's a real miss in the industry. And we're doing more and more town hall meetings. I mean, I've done 3 of them this week, and I'm going to do 3 next week to explain the business model to members. It's a growing part of our business of treating members as owners, not just as customers.
Yeah, I think that was one of the great lines in the white paper too. I mean, it's just it's such an important differentiation, distinction in that. Jim, I really appreciate your time and your insight, and I would love to talk more. I mean, it's hopefully I can hit you up for some more insight. And I know at Club Benchmarking you do so much research as well,
Yeah,
and valuable information that I think many club leaders would appreciate.
yeah, we study it, as you know, Ed. Getting ready for this podcast, I did a comparison of 2019 to 23, post-COVID, pre-COVID, and post-COVID. And the club industry has changed dramatically We're generating a lot of capital. We're investing it in facilities. Half the clubs have a waiting list to get in. That's never happened before.
That's nuts.
Right? In the time that we've been in, we've had contraction. The number of clubs have gone from over 5,000 down to 3,800 in terms of that. And the industry is moving towards being healthier and healthier every day. And, thanks for what you're doing of helping to educate people.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that and look forward to talking to you more.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And thank you for listening. If you find this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.